Hello there. Simple second channel video today because I did the thing I said I wasn't going to do. I bought Blu-ray drives to put in my CD ripping robot. Not because they're Blu-ray drives, but because the drives that I did end up buying that I had to put so much effort into making work don't work. So let's go over why I'm replacing those drives, what I'm replacing them with, and the level of effort I have to go to make these drives work. All right, if you didn't see my main channel video about this from a while ago, this is an Alaritech Auto Publisher LS, and you should really just go watch the video or else this isn't gonna make any sense at all. This is a CD ripping robot. It has an arm that reaches down, it grabs a CD, and it goes and it puts it in one of these CD drives automatically so that I can just queue up to 200 discs at once between 3 bins, the other one's down here, and let it archive everything automatically. I'm still working on improving this machine and the workflow. You can see I have added a webcam up here that is able to take a picture of the disc when it is in the tray before it closes so that I can record what the disc labels look like. Now, I'm not looking to get like perfect, super high quality disc images because you can see the reflections off of a disc like this that has the exposed aluminum layer. So anything above this is a problem. So this is not the archival photo. This is just for quick reference in case, say, the names of the discs or something get disassociated with the files. This makes it really easy to figure out exactly what was what. Now, why am I replacing these drives after all of that effort? Well, it's because of this CD. This is Driver, You Were the Wheelman for PC. This is a game that has CD audio tracks. So this is a CD-ROM X, a multi-mode CD. The game is on the first track of this disc, and then the rest of the tracks on this are all audio, which for some reason causes this drive to crash when I put it in there at the Linux kernel level, and I have to power cycle the machine to get it to work again. I don't understand why. Now, I think I determined after some more testing that I was able to read these discs with Redumper, but when I tried to read them with CDR-DAO, it always crashed, and it just made me not like these drives instantly, and I wanted to switch to something more reputable within the community as well. So these are going out, and instead, I'm putting different ones in. The different drives are 3 of these Asus, again, surprisingly, BW16D1HT drives. Now, this one has already been removed and put here because these drives are not usable as is out of the box. I have to flash the firmware on them to make them work in the way that is better for this. Because these are exactly the same drive as the Blu-ray drive that I believe I showed in the video originally that I failed for testing purposes. Turns out, we can modify the firmware on these thanks to awesome work from community members in the CD ripping Redumper and Make MKV spaces, actually, that will allow us to do pretty much everything I want to do with optical media. So we're going to go over what these can't do and what they can do after firmware flashing, how to flash the firmware, and then a small look at using Redumper because I am not an expert at that at all. I still need to learn a lot more about it. Now, first off, when I say these Asus and this LG drive are identical, I mean identical. So we can see a PCB revision code down here. It is B8, or is it J8? I think it's B8, 2015-0508, and it's the same on both of these drives. Now, you have to have this particular revision of the drive electronics, if I remember correctly, for the firmware flashing to work, or there is some other rigmarole you got to go through. I'm not an expert on it. Will just be working with these drives today because they're the ones that you get if you buy them right now. So that's realistically what you need to know. So we're going to flash this LG drive, but it is going to be the exact same process as this Asus drive. This one has not been flashed yet. And I want to demonstrate to you what this cannot do in its stock state so that we can appreciate what flashing the firmware does because it is so much better after it is flashed. Although I think it's going to break some stuff, but let me just show you what I'm talking about. For this first test, though, I'll let you know that I just have Foo Fighters, the color and the shape in this drive. This is a bog standard Redbook audio CD. There is nothing fancy about it in any way. All right, over at my computer, I have a script that just wraps cdrdao so that I can quickly run this over and over again. Or it's going to output a folder over here. And let's just do this real fast so that we can get a rip started so you can see how this works out. So first I run cdinfo and I log that so that we can see information about the disk and the drive. So it is identified as an HLDTST, and then the thing there, the firmware and all that fun stuff. And then we see the audio tracks down here and the ISRC codes. So that is that. We can see here, this is ripping ridiculously slow. This is one of the reasons why I failed this drive at first. We're not gonna let this finish because this is insane. But we can also come over to here, and if I F5 refresh this folder, we can see it is ripping the bin for the bin queue that it's gonna generate, and it'll eventually work just fine. Now I'm gonna change out from the color and the shape here, and I'm going to put in They Might Be Giants Factory Showroom, which is a pre-gap hidden track disc. Now this is the offset and the track ripping directions to get the CD Paranoia program here to rip the pre-gap on this CD. So let's go ahead and attempt to run this. And we can see that the drive is just reporting errors. Now, I've encountered 3 different ways that drives fail this particular test. The most common way is that they just fail like this. The least common way is that they will lie and they'll just return zeros, which can be really weird because you can read an infinite amount of duration away from the table of contents, which is what it's checking. Well, the drive is checking to know where it can read. And it'll just return zeros for anything you request data for, if it's outside of the table of contents. And then there are the good drives that can actually read this. And coincidentally, turns out, I have one of these in the test bench computer that I am doing this with. So all I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna remove Factory Showroom from this drive, and I'm gonna put it in this drive, and I'm gonna change the device ID from SR1 to SR0. And when I do that, we'll see the progress bar pops up and it is ripping just fine. It will throw a couple of errors, but they don't actually impact anything from my testing. As long as we see that progress bar going, it usually means it's working just fine. And we technically don't even need to let this finish. So we can go look at our pre-gap file, which is in the RIP folder right here. Open that with Audacity, and we will see, boom, this is the hidden track before track 1, which is over here. Now, this isn't a particularly common thing to have. There aren't a lot of pre-gap hidden CDs out there, but it is something that you should be aware of, and if you can't handle, it means that your ripping setup is incomplete. So this is something that I want to handle, but getting this particular feature into an all-in-one drive has been a complete nightmare, which is where the custom firmware comes in. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna reboot to Windows because the firmware flashing tools are far more mature over there, and we're going to go ahead and flash this LG drive's firmware with a new version that'll let me do, well, as you can probably guess, that with it. Okay, this is a slightly confusing part of this process. So let me walk you through some of the web pages for some of the software that we're gonna be using so that I can explain exactly what we're doing and why what I'm doing feels like it's going off the beaten path, but it isn't, because this is a little hair-raising for, not totally cheap hardware here. All right. So this is the Redump wiki that talks about compatible optical drives here. Redump is an archiving community that works on trying to make sure that they can back up stuff not only correctly, but consistently. So one of their objectives is to take drives and qualify them so that they know exactly how they rip media. Again, CD ripping in particular is horrible, and you get things like drive offsets where This drive may offset frame values by a level of 6, whereas the drive that's in this computer might do it by, 100 frames. Frames is basically the names for sectors on CDs. So they catalog this stuff so that when a dump is done and the drive is mentioned with that dump, they know exactly where the data should be relative to other drives. Just the kind of minutia that you have to get into with this kind of stuff. Now, because they have to qualify drives like that, they have a list of preferred drives that they only want to work with, because elsewise it puts a lot more burden on them to try and figure out stuff. And aside from a plentiful pile of Plex stores that are painful to purchase, we have this single ASUS Blu-ray drive down here. But it also says this little rib thing right here next to it, because we can flash a custom firmware onto this drive. That brings us over to this page, where when we look at the custom JB8 firmware, we can actually see a much larger list of drives, which includes my 16NS40 right here. Now, these drives have to have the exact matching model number on the PCB that I showed you there, which realistically, that probably indicates the year that it was designed, and that's a decade ago. So the majority of them are probably that, but it is something that you need to be aware of in case you get one of these used or something. So all of these drives are basically physically identical. So we know we can modify the firmware on these drives. Which brings us to the flashing instructions. Make MKV is mentioned here. Now, Make MKV is a program that allows you to rip Blu-rays to your computer. I'm not going to discuss this topic further, but Make MKV also comes with an SDF tool for flashing the drive firmware for reasons that allows you to change the firmware. And that is what we will be using to modify the firmware for these drives so that we can read our pre-gap hidden audio track. Because one of the things that this does here, we can see by this especially modified version of the firmware, it enables reading the lead out without using the cache, but in general, it allows the drive to be more flexible about reading what data it can from a disk, even if it's outside of the table of contents. So we have a bunch of tools and things here that you need to collect, mostly from the Make MKV side, but let me just walk you through the steps that we can do here. So I have Make MKV installed on this machine now, and we can, well, we could run that, but we don't really need to. We have the SDF tool 64 here, which is one that we would normally run, but this is a command line tool, which is why they also have the GUI version here that we can run. But we should probably run this as administrator so that it can access the hardware to low level. All right, now I will mention that you'll probably run this and then come into like weird UI scaling problems. Here is how I have the high DPI UI scaling configured on this so that it's actually legible. Okay, so let's go ahead and pick our drive here. We have the HL DTST drive, and we can see a few things here. This lists it as encrypted firmware, and we can read, write, and recover the drive. Now, the encrypted firmware is basically why I'm doing this, because we come over to the Linux flashing notes. You need to check whether your drive has encrypted firmware, and you have to do some funky stuff with it, if it is, and pass, because this GUI tool just makes all of that go away. So it's realistically just worth installing Windows for a small time on here, just to get this done. It's not worth it. I would also not recommend trying to run this software in Wine, because you don't really want to deal with extremely low-level hardware stuff, possibly having issues in bricking your expensive Blu-ray drives. Now, I have run into a problem when trying to work with this software. We can try to read the firmware here. I will go ahead and do that. It's creating a firmware dump. It's going to output that over here. But the problem is we get dump user like this. And as far as I can tell, this isn't actually a complete backup of the firmware that's already on the drive. It seems like this tool is, for some reason, able to write the firmware, but not read it. That could be because it's encrypted. I'm not exactly sure. The way that this software works is it actually updates the firmware of the drive using an encrypted file, but the final installed version of the firmware is not encrypted. So I haven't actually tested this yet, but we'll flash this drive and then we will try to read the firmware back afterwards and see if that works then, because it might just be because of the encrypted firmware. Actually, I don't know. I'm curious to find out. So we can go ahead and do a firmware dump, but it's not really going to do a whole lot for us, I suspect. So, But now we can go ahead and write the firmware. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick this file here, which is the same as this right here. You can download it from the Redump wiki, which actually links to an archive.org page. Now you'll notice that this firmware file is listed as being for the ASUS drive, but it will be totally fine. There's a note down here. Note, if you flash RibShark's firmware on your drive, it will appear on your computer as if it were an ASUS BW16D1HT. This is intentional, has no bad side effects. Because again, all of drives are physically identical. So even though this is the LG version of the drive, it's not gonna matter. All right, so let's go ahead and flash this. Now, I will note that I have this drive directly connected to SATA on the motherboard. It's just outside of the case using really long cables that That way I can easily swap through the 4 different drives that I have to flash here. But I wouldn't recommend using this through a USB adapter. It might work, but similar to wine, just don't add any extra complications you don't have to. And while I was yakking about that, it finished. Now we need to power cycle the machine so that it can load the new firmware on a clean boot. And we'll go ahead and do that by rebooting back to Linux. All right, we're rebooted, and I'm gonna go ahead and put factory showroom back in here. It mentions not having a disk in the drive when you flash it. I don't know why, but I have been abiding by that. And back over on Linux here, we have the same exact CD paranoia command as before. The audio disk has just shown up, so let's go ahead and try and rip this now. That's probably normal genome stuff. Now, this is actually something that I observed last time I tried this too. For some reason, with this firmware, these drives take forever to start reading. And I think we're gonna see this behavior with CDR-DAO as well. So you can actually see the clock at the top of this, and I'll cut to when it actually starts reading. And there we go. I'm gonna guess 1 or 2 minutes later, it has actually started to rip, but it's working perfectly. It actually gives even fewer errors than the other drives that can just do this out of the box too, which is really, really cool. And to get a sneak peek, if I open the file before it's finished here with Audacity, we can see our pre-gap track right there, ripped with a drive that could not previously do it. But it's not all roses. So as I mentioned, for some reason, this seems to break my existing CD ripping process. So if I go and I try to rip with CDR-DAO now, we will get the CD info output. Although this is gonna run really slow. For some reason, the media catalog number stuff is really slow with this disk in particular. So I'm actually gonna switch back to Foo Fighters here. All right, let's try this again. Going over here, this should end up being about 3K when all is said and done. There we go. Should say no CD text at the bottom. Good. And now it should attempt reading the disk with CDR-DAO. However, I have not actually seen it advanced beyond this point. It may have created a bin file that was 0 bytes in size, but I have not seen CDR-DAO actually read anything. But it gets a little worse, because if I cancel this and I go modify my script to add a verbose output flag, -v, I have no idea what value, so let's just throw 25 in there. And rerun this after the CD info, we will see that it continuously sends SCSI read commands to the drive, and they never really seem to work right. And they're taking 7 seconds, which is insane. I have no idea what's happening here. So I am not sure if or how I could fix this. And this is where I will have to be switching to Redump. And when I say Redump, I really mean Redumper, which is the program for the Redump project. This is what we need to be able to run. Now I'm going to go ahead and just copy this over to my RIP folder here, and I'm going to make another copy of my RIP script here that uses Redump instead. And this is where I need to learn how to use Redumper because I don't actually know what the parameters are, the configuration options, and all of that fun stuff. So all I'm going to do here is just run it against the drive directly, which is going to use defaults that don't always seem to make the most sense, but it will work for now. So we go back over to the script, we can run redumper.sh. And now, check our output. Oh, that's true, because it's actually one directory up. One moment, minor pebcac. There we go, okay. Yeah, again, I am not an expert at Redumper, but we can see here that it is beginning to read the disk. We can see the scram file here. Seems to be what gets all of the raw data from the drive. Now, Redumper reads the disks from the drive at a slightly lower level than something like CDR-DAO, which makes it return much more interesting data, like subcode data. I don't know how to parse all of this yet, and I'm not even sure everything that we can get from that can be parsed into something meaningful, especially for something like karaoke disks that would have graphics embedded in there. But that is recording it so that we can work on processing that later. I do want to standardize to Redump no matter what, so this isn't really a big problem, but it would be kind of nice if it didn't break my existing workflow. But it is going to be the push that's going to force me to start using Redumper for this stuff. But one nice thing we can see here is that Redumper rips these CDs fast. It's really awesome how quickly this can read a disk. So these are 48-speed CD drives, which is excellent. They're also 16-speed DVD drives. If I remember correctly, the ones that I put in there were 12-speed. So these are actually going to be faster for DVDs, which is really cool. Makes the USB 3.0 modifications that I did all the more important as well. Well, I think that's it for what I'm going to do for right now. I'm going to end this video here, but later today I'm probably going to put these drives in the robot. But again, I'm not going to be able to use them until I can finish writing the software. So probably won't have them done to be demonstratable in that amount of time. So that is the next stage of this project. I can show you a preview of what the webcam built into the top of the drives looks like, because I've been working on that on stream. And when a disk is loaded, now the web interface will go ahead and grab a picture of the CD and it integrates it into the web interface's log of the disk that it's ripping, so you can see a photo of the CD alongside the information about it as it's being ripped, which is really, really handy to have, because sometimes the disk labels can just make it that much easier to identify something. So yeah, really looking forward to making more progress on that, and this is definitely going to be a good step along the way. But that's it for now. This feels like a slightly more produced second channel video, so I don't know if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to help support the channel. You can find me on Patreon, but for now, that's it, and I will see you next time.